is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. A watershed moment. United Nations Climate Conference COP27 kicks off in Egypt with climate compensation on its agenda for the first time. Passengers miraculously pulled from a submerged plane after it plunged into Lake Victoria. We're live in Tanzania. A controversial new law designed to bring justice to the victims of the Spanish Civil War reopens old wounds. World leaders are meeting in Egypt for the United Nations Climate Summit, COP27. They've agreed to discuss rich nations compensating countries most vulnerable to climate change. The Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, known for its pristine beaches and warm weather, is at the centre of the high-level talks on climate. The Egyptian hosts say their conference will be a watershed moment, focusing on implementing the pledges of COP26, which saw a promise to reduce carbon pollution. But emissions are still on the rise. Our correspondent Yasser Hakim is live in Sharm el-Sheikh for us. So Yasser, Egypt says the conference will be about implementing key pledges. What can we expect?
Well, what Egypt is trying to do.
Apologies, we appear to have lost that connection to Sharm el-Sheikh. Should we see if we can re-establish that? Hi Yasser, I think we have you back.
What I was saying that Egypt is trying to push the developing nations and Africa in particular to get the developed nations who they feel are responsible for climate change to stick to their pledges. There have been pledges in COP26, there have been pledges in Paris Climate Agreement, but nothing has been implemented. That's why they're calling it the implementation, COP of implementation. And one of the breakthrough agreements that have been gone today or signed today and has been described as successful by Egypt's foreign minister Sameh Shoukry, who is also the president of COP27, is what is called now the loss and damages on the agenda. So let's see what he says about the loss and damages clause in the new agenda.
I particularly welcome the agreement of the parties to include a new agenda item on funding arrangements to respond to loss and damage. This creates, for the first time, an institutionally stable space on the formal agenda of the COP and the Paris Agreement to discuss the pressing issue of funding arrangements needed to deal with existing gaps in responding to loss and damage.
In short, what he says is that now that certain events, such as flooding in a country in Africa, that has been caused by climate change, the losses and damages should be paid by the developed nations, and there will be a specific amount of money known, and it was to be addressed and paid for. Before, or currently, what we see is that developed.
And apologies again, we have some disruption with that connection to Sharm el-Sheikh, but that was Yasser Hakim reporting there. Well, as world leaders gather in Egypt for the COP27 climate summit, European countries are facing some difficult choices in trying to ensure there are sufficient energy supplies this winter without Russian gas, while maintaining commitments to cut back on fossil fuels. Our correspondent Michael Voss reports.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
A year ago at COP26 in Glasgow, it looked as if the world was united in its commitment to combat global warming. But then came the energy crisis provoked by Russia's war in Ukraine and the economic turmoil that followed. In the scramble to replace Russian oil and gas, EU coal consumption rose by 10% in the first half of this year. Poland, a major producer, now only plans to phase it out by 2049. In Germany, at least 20 coal-fired power plants are being resurrected or extended past their closing dates to ensure enough energy to get through the winter. Britain has also backtracked on its commitments, issuing new licences for oil and gas exploration. Norway is also expanding production as it seeks to replace Russian gas. On the plus side, though, investments in renewable energy sources such as solar energy and wind power are increasing in response to the energy crisis. The UK now produces almost 40% of its electricity from renewables, mainly offshore wind farms. Many European countries have experienced extreme weather conditions this year, with forest fires in Portugal, France and Spain. Britain and France have also suffered from severe droughts affecting water supplies and crops. But others are faring far worse, with millions facing starvation in drought-stricken East Africa or the floods which have inundated Pakistan. And at COP27, Europe, along with other developed countries, is under pressure to meet its commitments to deliver $100 billion a year to help poorer countries cope.
Those that are the most vulnerable, those that are the most affected, it is at the top of the list of priorities, because they're the ones who are sustaining the damage. Again, you call Pakistan, a third of the country underwater, billions of dollars in damages, lives lost, millions displaced. How do they recover from that?
Britain's latest Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has arrived in Egypt, but initially said he wouldn't attend. In these tough economic times, will fighting global warming remain a European priority? Michael Voss, CGTN.
The Climate Vulnerable Forum is a group of countries which are most affected by climate change. It has a rotating presidency currently held by Ghana. Juliet Mann spoke to the head of Ghana's Environmental Protection Agency, Dr. Henry Kokofu, and asked for his expectations for COP27.
COP27 must deliver on the special needs and circumstances of these vulnerable countries. That represents about 1.5 billion people. And for that matter, we're looking at larger space Africa as a continent also. So indeed, Egypt COP27 is dubbed an African COP. So we think this is about time we can champion the cause of Africa and at the larger extent vulnerable countries that are so heavily impacted on by climate effects.
So lots of promises, lots of pledges were made at COP26 in Glasgow last year, especially around funding for vulnerable communities to help cope with climate disasters. How much progress has there really been?
You may recall that the most typical of the promises had to do with the $100 billion annually to be provided by developed countries. That has not been fulfilled yet. Again, there was also a host of actions that will lead into the doubling of adaptation funds. We haven't seen that one yet. So we're going into this COP27 impressing upon those who have a lot to do to live up to expectation. Nevertheless, we've been able to, under multilateral and bilateral agreements, realize some form of commitments. For instance, Ghana and Switzerland have signed an agreement on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that looks at clean cooking stoves initiatives and other programs that aims at limiting emissions in the country. So we think going into COP27, there is the need for a dedicated funding source for issues like loss and damage, so that we can all appreciate the fact that vulnerable countries that suffer loss and damage can rely on some sort of sustainable funding source, so we will be able to alleviate the pain and the sufferings of the people.
With the war in Ukraine affecting energy flows from Russia, Norway has become Europe's largest supplier of natural gas. But the Nordic nation also has some of the world's most ambitious climate targets and is looking to renewable sources and new technologies to achieve them. Our correspondent Peter Oliver looked at one project that will take industrial carbon dioxide emissions and bury it under the seabed.
Along with the Paris Agreement on climate change, Norway is committed to a 90 to 95% greenhouse gas emissions reduction below 1990 levels by 2050. Being Europe's go-to for oil and gas, Norway is trying to balance fossil fuel production with a transition to green alternatives. For some industry insiders, embracing the future is the key to achieving this goal.
New technology. Being open-minded for new technology, support actually those who are the innovators, say hooray to them, encourage them. They are the heroes for today and tomorrow.
One of the technologies embraced by Norway has been carbon capture and storage, or CCS. The country's Longship project and the new Northern Lights venture, which is a cooperation between Norwegian state energy giant Equinor, along with Shell and Total. Northern Lights, which will come online in 2024, sees CCS technology branch out in a new direction.
Traditionally, CCS projects are usually capturing the volume from their own emissions, whichever facilities it is, and injecting them themselves. What we are developing with Longship and then with Northern Light in particular is transport and storage offered as a service to any kind of industry in any location which are reachable for us for transport.
The project is still under construction, but the endeavour, which will see liquefied carbon dioxide pumped into reservoirs 2,600 metres below the seabed, is taking shape.
The CO2 will arrive by ship just over there. It'll then make its way into 12 gigantic steel containers. It'll be housed just over my left shoulder there. By the time this project hits its second phase, which it's estimated to do in 2026, it's hoped it'll be able to store between 5 and 7 million tonnes of CO2 every single year.
Two huge ships bringing CO2 into Norway are currently under construction in China's Liaoning province shipyards to aid with deliveries. The Norwegian government agency responsible for regulating the petroleum resources on the Norwegian continental shelf says Norway is ready to be a leader in this field.
And we believe that we have high capacity. With the estimates that we've done is that you can store or inject more than 100 years of Germany's current emissions per year. So that's quite a lot.
Carbon capture and storage is crucial in Norway's transition from fossil fuel to carbon-neutral alternatives. CCS also provides very dirty industries with the ability to clean up production.
Some industries, even if they transition to renewable for the supply of power, their own process emits CO2. That's what we call the hard-to-abate emissions. So those industries like cement, waste incineration, metallurgy for the time being, they can't produce their own product without emitting CO2.
That is where the projects in Norway could become important in the developing world to allow nations to build infrastructure and industry while still hitting climate targets, as the steel and cement industries are responsible for 14% of all global emissions. While critics raise worries about the risk of leaks on undersea reservoirs, those behind projects like Northern Lights insist it is safe and is putting the carbon back where it came from, underground. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Wrong, Norway.
Still ahead here on CGTN, the latest on the plane that crash-landed in Lake Victoria, Tanzania, and the attempts by local residents to pull it out of the water.
I can't wait to tell the story of the real China to the world.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
I'm travelling around China, introducing China to the world. There are so many stories here to tell.
So my family has been connected with China now for almost 150 years. My task now is to set us up for the next 150 years.
Each side has a huge amount to offer the other. Neither is right or wrong, and each can learn from the other.
These are the foundations that create the links between ordinary people
try to see China as a process rather than a fixed point.
Over the last 25 years, I've been connecting China with Scotland, Angus with Yantai. We should be encouraging even greater two-way exchange.
By far the most important thing is to tell stories.
Manchester's been my home and Wuhan is my second home.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
If we can build bridges, we can learn more from one another. That can only lead to good things for both sides.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our main headline. A watershed moment. The United Nations Climate Conference COP27 kicks off in Egypt with climate compensation on its agenda for the first time. The US midterm elections are about to get underway. A key battleground in the midterms is Pennsylvania. President Joe Biden and former Presidents Barack Obama and Donald Trump all campaigning there for their party's candidates. Benji Hire now tells us what issues the Democrats are focusing on.
Well, the battle to decide which party takes control of Congress and the building behind me is entering its final stages, and it's one that's being fought around the country. On Saturday, much of the focus on Pennsylvania, one of the tightest races and one being most watched, given that it could decide the balance of power in both chambers. A trio of presidents descending on the state. President Joe Biden speaking to supporters in Philadelphia to provide his backing and support to the gubernatorial candidate Josh Shapiro, and the Democrat Party Senate candidate John Fetterman, still recovering from a stroke. Interestingly, much of the speech revolving around the economy, boasting about the administration's record of 10 million jobs being created since Joe Biden took office in the White House. But still, the president harking back to much of the rhetoric that he's been espousing over the past week, speaking to how this election, in his words, is one where democracy is at stake, how this is a defining moment for the country, how character is on the ballot, and finally, how this is a vote on a vision for America. Words echoed by Barack Obama in an address earlier on in the day, where he was focusing on a number of different areas, including abortion, speaking to how clocks go back in America on Saturday evening, but it's up to the voters to ensure that America doesn't go back 50 years in regard to women's access to abortion. And then don't forget, Donald Trump, the former president, also making his mark on the state of Pennsylvania on Saturday night, holding a rally in support of the Senate and gubernatorial candidates on the Republican side. Celebrity doctor Mehmet Oz, who is tied neck and neck with John Fetterman in the polls, and the candidate for governor who actually turned up here on the steps of the US Capitol on January 6th and has peddled that myth instigated by Donald Trump that the former president did not lose the election in 2020. Donald Trump, don't forget, of course, just a couple of days ago in Iowa, telling supporters that he'll very, 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 very probably run for office again. Benji Hire, CGTN in Washington, D.C.
Well, election officials in the US state of Arizona report receiving more than 100 violent threats in the run-up to this week's key vote. Officials in Maricopa, one of the most fiercely contested counties, received alarming emails and social media posts between July and August, including threats to share their personal information online. In other news, a Russian-held dam in Ukraine has been damaged in shelling, that's according to Russian news reports. The Novokakhovka Dam blocks the Dnipro River upstream of Kherson, where Ukrainian forces have been making advances. Moscow says the dam was damaged in a rocket launch attack from a US-made missile system. And a passenger plane has crash-landed into Lake Victoria in Tanzania with 43 people on board. Bystanders tried to pull the plane from the water using ropes and formed human chains to rescue passengers and crew. The plane came down in stormy weather just before it was due to land in the city of Bukoba. A new law designed to bring justice to the victims of the Spanish Civil War and the resulting dictatorship has come into force in Spain. The country's socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said he hoped to settle Spanish democracy's debt to its past. However, right-wing parties claim the move will only serve to reopen old wounds. Rahul Pathak reports from Madrid.
Nearly 50 years on from the death of Spain's fascist dictator Francisco Franco, his legacy is still a hugely divisive issue here. A memorial just outside Madrid, known as the Valley of the Fallen, was where the dictator was buried until his exhumation in 2019. His remains were brought here to this cemetery in El Pardo in Madrid. Now, at the time, the then acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said the move was the first step on the road to reconciliation. 3 years on, his government is introducing a new law designed to honour those who suffered violence and persecution during Franco's 36-year rule. It sought up to 114,000 civilians disappeared during the Spanish Civil War and the ensuing dictatorship. Under the new legislation known as the Democratic Memory Law, the government will directly assist in the search and exhumation of victims buried in mass graves. The bill will also pardon all victims of the regime who were sentenced on the grounds of political or religious beliefs. However, some groups representing the families of the victims say the new law does not go far enough.
What they have decided to do is what they have been doing for a while now. That is, the digging of mass graves where victims were buried. For us, it's not right that the government provides such a little budget for this. So the families of the victims end up fighting with each other to receive the money to retrieve the bodies.
The subject of Spain's political past still divides public opinion, and there are fears the new law could fuel tensions. The far-right Vox party has been particularly vocal in its criticism, claiming the bill is weighted too much in favour of those on the left.
We consider it to be a sectarian and totalitarian law, which enforces a partisan, a biased view of recent Spanish history. And this partisan version of Spanish history will be imposed by all conceivable means.
The Democratic Memory Bill may not even have enough time to make an impact. The main opposition, the centre-right PP, has promised to repeal the law if it wins the next election, due to be held in 2023. What is clear is that nearly half a century on, the wounds left by the dictatorship of Francisco Franco are still to heal. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Returning now to that news out of Tanzania, where a passenger plane has crashed into Lake Victoria with 43 people on board. Our correspondent Isaac Lukando is live in Dar es Salaam for us. So, Isaac, tell us the latest on the rescue efforts.
Well, we have new information now. When we last spoke, we had information that there were 3 people that had died out of the 43 that were on board the plane. But the Prime Minister of the country, Kassim Majaliwa, came out and announced that 19 people were feared dead on the plane. But this is in addition to the 26 that were rescued. So totaling that number, it comes to 45 people who were on the plane. And so the government here says that they will conduct an investigation to find out where these 2 other people came from. They can't seem to account for the 2 additional people. At the moment, the plane that was submerged in water has been pulled out closer to the shore, and this is perhaps how they were able to find out these other deaths. We know that during the course of the day, since the crash happened, there was communication with the cockpit. The 2 pilots were alive and were communicating. But later on, communication got fuzzy, and we this evening got a confirmation that the remaining 19 passengers and crew are feared dead.
Our correspondent Isaac Lucando in Dar es Salaam, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's day 2 of the China International Import Expo in Shanghai. A global trade fair is now in its 5th year, showcasing a wide range of products and is an important platform to promote China's market. Wu Bin has more.
As the world's one and only import expo at a national level, CIIE shares China's huge market by bringing together exhibitors around the world to promote their latest products. But for the past 5 years, many have shifted from the exhibitors to investors. For American medical company Boston Scientific, 2022 is a special year. The company participated in the China International Import Expo for the first time in 2019. It first showcased their imported technologies, and 3 years later, it established a new branch in Shanghai and domestically produced for the first time one of its most famous medical devices that are presented at the 5th CIIE.
In the past, we actually imported that technology completely to commercialize in China. Now, lately, we were able to localize that Polaris system and completely locally manufacturing that system in China. Now, through localization, we now will be able to respond and adapt our system a lot more faster and to tailor the needs for our customers in China and our patients in China.
The start of the production line, according to Chang, reflects the changing of perceptions of the Chinese market in the medical industry.
I think what we are viewing is that China is not only the destination for adoption or usage for our products, but it will become a very, very important manufacturing and sourcing base as part of our global supply chain network.
For many international companies that have entered the Chinese market long before the expo, the CIIE has brought even more opportunities for their expansion. Since 1957, when it first entered China from consumer-brand glasses to optoelectronics equipment, the German optical giant has continued to expand in China. Now, China has become its largest single market, and the last several years saw some fierce investment and growth in China together with the CIIE. Zeiss participated in the expo for 5 consecutive years and considered it a platform for more than just buying and selling.
And actually the expo has been becoming more and more important for us. We are also using the CIIE as a platform actually to have discussions with the different government authorities and also to lay out our strategy for the future moving forward.
And they are now targeting on China's 2 vibrant regions, the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta. The China International Import Expo has linked the world's products and attracted more investments. In 2021, the country's foreign direct investment inflow reached $173.48 billion, a new all-time high. And the first 3 quarters of 2022 saw an increase of 15.6% in foreign direct investment year-on-year. Wu Bin, CGTN, Shanghai.
And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview. There will be more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's Razor. For now, from all the team here in London, goodbye.